Hi there. It's November 25th, and we start today a journey through a new book of the scriptures. This book is the book of Daniel. And Daniel, in Hebrew, it means the Lord has judged, and it's not here as we have it in our Old Testament in the section of the prophets, but in the Hebrew scriptures, it's put in the third section of the writings, the Ketuvim. Now, Daniel is a book that is located in time after the first deporting of people by Nebuchadnezzar into Babylon, and in the time of Jehoiakim, when Jehoiakim is taken. And at the time Jehoiakim is taken, Daniel's opening tells us of youths who are taken, who are part of the aristocracy, and they're taken away to the land of Shinar, which is in Babylon, and there they are held and looked after and cared for, and they are also educated in the ways of the Babylonians. We note as well that the four that we are looking at, particularly in this book, Daniel himself, and then his friends Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, who we also know as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They have their names changed, and this seems to have happened to dissociate them with the culture that's gone, and to make them more like they are acceptable to the Babylonians. And by the way, Daniel's name is also changed to Belteshazzar, which was a Babylonian name. Interestingly, we tend to know Daniel better by his Hebrew name, while we tend to know Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But when we meet these young lads, they are being educated, but they're also being fed from the king's table, from the king's provision. But obviously there are issues for Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego for eating food that has most likely been offered to the idols, to the Babylonian idols, and therefore they ask not to eat meat from the king's table, but instead to eat vegetables. The people who are looking after them are afraid that this is going to make them unwell and is going to get them into trouble for not having followed the king's instruction. But Daniel, in his first show of faith, says, no, give us these vegetables, give us this diet, and we will show you that God will look after us. And actually, after a period of time, we will be well and fit. And of course, that's what happens. They feed the lads the vegetables that they request, and they actually are looking better than the ones who've had the king's portion. And so actually this is something that it demonstrates God's being with them. And also it says that they increased in wisdom and understanding in all matters. They were really becoming outstanding in the way that they behaved. There are real echoes in this story of the story of Joseph and his standing with Pharaoh. These are young men, these are God's people, they're under God's protection, and we're going to hear how by standing up for their faith, by standing strong in the name of the Lord, they not only saved themselves, but they also helped others. And as we move on to chapter 2, and we're just reading down to verse 23 of chapter 2, we read of the king Nebuchadnezzar, or we call him Nebuchadnezzar, but actually in Hebrew his proper name, or in Babylonian, was Nebuchadrezzar. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and he wants his sorcerers and his wise men and his special team to interpret the dream for him. So they come and they ask the king what the dream is. Now, interestingly, here Daniel changes at this point, in chapter 2, verse 3, changes from Hebrew into Aramaic, Aramite in the text. And Aramaic is the language of the Babylonians. It's the language of the Assyrians. It's the whole language. It's a lingua franca. It's kind of a business language. It's connected and related to Hebrew. It's a Semitic language, and therefore it's just written in the same way, and maybe understandable just by Hebrew speakers. But from here on, for several chapters, the book of Daniel is written in Aramaic. And so the king replies in Aramaic, and he says to his wise men and his sorcerers, his astrologers, says, I'm not going to tell you my dream. You have to tell me my dream, and then I'll know that you're actually speaking the truth. Of course, the astronomers and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the wise men, the magicians, are absolutely appalled at this, and they say no one can know this, no one can do this. But interestingly, they acknowledge only the one with whom God lives in the flesh. And they point that out. Only someone who really knows God for themselves can tell this. Daniel hears about the threat that is against the wise men, and in fact Daniel and Azariah, Hananiah and Mishael are under threat here as well. And Daniel asks, why are they facing this terrible challenge, this terrible fate? And they're told about the situation with the king's dream. Daniel then says that God is able to interpret dreams, and he can do this. He can tell the king what his dream is. And then he tells his friends, Azariah, Hananiah, Mishael, to pray and to ask the Lord to have mercy. And as he sleeps in the night, the Lord reveals the dream of Nebuchadnezzar to Daniel. And then there is, at the end of our reading in chapter 2, a beautiful blessing, an acknowledgement of God, with whom are all the secrets and of insight and wisdom, the one who puts down and sets up kings. And he praises the God of his fathers for giving him wisdom and strength, and for showing him what it is the king has dreamed, which we're going to see more of in the next reading and the next part of Daniel. This is such an encouraging start to Daniel. We see right from the word go, Daniel's reliance on the Lord, Daniel's reliance on the Lord's ability to intervene, even in really testing situations. We see several miraculous things happening here, and it just commends to us the fact that God has insight, God has wisdom, God has strength, even when we don't, and we are able to ask him to give us that wisdom, to give us that insight, and he can show us things that perhaps to our human insight are not available, but by his Spirit he can reveal. Have a very good November 25th.